To better understand the influence of Christianity on science, we can take the idea of natural law or the laws of nature. Ideas of natural law appeared during Greek times when Greeks thought that order was immanent in nature. Christianity, however, changed the idea of natural order to a law imposed by God. The natural law was not inside matter but imposed upon nature from the outside. To understand the difference between these two conceptions of natural law, we can ask a simple question. Why are the laws of nature precisely what they are? Why are they not something else? For example, if E equals mc squared is a law of nature, then why this specific law and no other? In principle, the law could be E equals mc or E equals mc cubed. Why does it have to be E equals mc squared? Greeks would have tried to explain all laws based on some sufficient reason which was rational and the immanent nature of the world. Through that reasoning, they would establish the necessity of the law. Christianity had a problem with necessity because most of its claims could not be proven to be necessary. For example, we can ask, why did God have to sacrifice his son to relieve mankind of its sins? Even if he wanted to end the sinning and suffering, why should God not expect an end to sinning before putting an end to suffering? Isn't it the case that if we don't like the effect, then we have to end the cause of that effect? Why should God put an end to human suffering by sacrificing his son who had done no sins? Isn't that contrary to all principles of justice and morality? The immanent conception of law which prevailed during Greek times requires us to give rational justification for everything. Therefore, if God created the world in a certain way, we should be able to question why he did that in a specific way. We should explain why the law is something specific and not something else. Rationality means that God could not do whatever he felt like doing. He had to do only that which was sufficiently justified and rational. Questions of necessity and sufficient reason open up a new set of problems that Christianity could not deal with. Therefore, Christian theologians called rationality, sufficient reason, and the desire to establish the necessity of laws a challenge to God's omnipotence. They stated that if God's actions had to be justified based on reason, then God could not be the absolute monarch of the world. An omnipotent God can do whatever he feels like. He doesn't have to justify his actions based on reason or necessity. Therefore, we should not seek necessity in why God does something. When God created the laws of nature, we cannot question why he created the laws in a certain way. This idea is called divine voluntarism. It means that God willed the world to be in a certain way. He created the covenants of religion, he created the laws of nature. We cannot ask why the covenant is a certain way and not another way. We cannot ask why the laws of nature are only one way and not another way. In the domain of human affairs, the same idea is called ethical voluntarism. It means that humans can choose to be governed by whatever law they want to be governed by. The ideas of morality, virtuosity, rightness, wrongness, etc., have no innate rationality according to voluntarism. They can be whatever we want them to be. Due to ethical voluntarism, if two theories are equally good explanations of the data, but only one explanation is chosen, we cannot see necessity in why that theory was chosen. The answer to all such questions of necessity is voluntarism. We just did what we wanted to do. We willed it in one way because we are free to will, and that requires no further necessary explanation. Science is an institution comprised of people. Those people are not bound to establish the rational necessity of their choices. They can choose to create and mold science in whichever way they deem fit. Of course, they choose whatever works for them. Thus, all the laws of religion, science, and society are devoid of the principle of necessity and sufficient reason. Enlightenment took individualism to a whole new level. God was freed from the requirement of sufficient and necessary reasoning. He could do whatever he wished. Hence, we can never ask questions about why something is the way it is. We have to accept that it is the way it is. Similarly, man gets to exercise his freedom in creating social laws. Nobody can ask why the laws are one way and not another. They are simply the will of the people. After all, if God is not bound by necessity, then people in the world are also not bound by necessity. Now, very few people at present know that modern science lacks necessity. David Hume, a famous critic of science during Enlightenment, remarked that the laws of science could be called sufficient but not necessary. Another law could explain the same observations differently. In 20th century philosophy, this came to be known as the underdetermination problem. The phenomena underdetermine the theory. Then, all the laws of science were also discovered to be lacking sufficiency. For example, when two particles collide, the particles can split into many particles or merge into one particle. Classical physics cannot explain what happens. Indeterminism is a basic feature of all laws. It means that the laws of science lack both necessity and sufficiency. If these laws are called God's laws, then even God doesn't fully predict what will happen or explain why it happens one way and not another. The indeterminism of science now becomes God's ignorance of what happens and how. Therefore, anyone who says that enlightenment broke away from faith towards rationality doesn't know what enlightenment is. Enlightenment did not bring rationality, it only broke the monopoly on power to create laws. The Catholic Church and the kings had that monopoly previously. Enlightenment distributed that power to everyone. But how that power should be used rationally was not clear earlier, and it was not clear afterwards. People were not giving sufficient reasons and necessity for actions before, and they were not giving it afterwards. Everyone got the freedom to create religious, scientific, and social laws, which only the church or the kings could do earlier. Enlightenment was therefore not a rationality movement, it was a political movement to distribute power. Enlightenment was a way to put checks and balances on the power of the church and the kings. Many powerful institutions were created after that. For example, today we can see how military is one institution and judiciary is another. Earlier they were combined into the monarchic institution. The academic system is one institution and religion is separate from that. Earlier both were combined by the church. People can create their own institutions, and there are millions of such institutions at present. Earlier, monarchy and church were the only institution. By distributing power and dividing institutions, each institution's power was limited by the other institutions. But fundamentally, each institution works in its own interest. They don't have to justify their actions based on rational necessity or sufficient reason. They can do whatever they want because at the root of enlightenment is divine voluntarism and ethical voluntarism. When God's actions are not justified by reason, then the actions of people who follow this God are also not required to justify their actions. The modern scientific concept of law is drawn from the concept of law in Judaism. According to Judaism, God gave Moses the Ten Commandments. God did not explain to Moses why those specific commandments and no others. God did not explain why only 10 commandments and not 20. Then, if God had given just 10 commandments, then it is not clear why people made up thousands of additional laws later on. Why not be satisfied with just the 10 commandments? Nobody can ask why these laws and why not other laws, or why a certain number of laws. It is just the way things are. Due to the absence of rational necessity, these laws were called contracts between man and God. There is no rational necessity in a contract. It is just the way God willed humanity to live, and if man agreed to follow God's laws, then he would get a place in heaven. Otherwise, he will go to hell. The contractual conception of religion makes it impossible for anyone to understand religion. But this is not unique to religion. The same problem exists in science too. We cannot seek the necessity for natural laws. Moreover, none of the laws that modern science has created are sufficient to explain what actually happens. Every law till date created by science has been indeterministic. Therefore, the laws are neither necessary nor sufficient. Thus, at the heart of all laws, whether they are religious, scientific, or social, is the absence of necessity and sufficiency. The laws of science keep changing. Science is nothing more than the current consensus. If tomorrow that consensus changes, then the laws of science would also change. A law of science is nothing more than a contract between scientists. They have agreed to use the current laws. They do not establish the necessity or sufficiency of these laws. That is because in the entire history of laws, beginning with Judaism, the laws have never been necessary or sufficient. Science just borrowed the religious concept of law and inherited the absence of necessity and sufficiency. Science extended the religious contractual conception of law and defined science as current man made contracts.